Hello, and welcome to the Artificial Podcast, with your host Nick Myers.
Artificial
intelligence, voice recognition,
machine learning,
robotic,
actionable analytics.
It is Nick's goal to help everyone understand how AI and voice technology are reshaping our lives both personally and within organizations. Your glimpse into the growing world of AI and voice first starts now.
Nick Myers,
Nick Myers. Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Hey, Brett, you want to play another guessing game before we start this week's episode? I promise it'll be fun.
No. Oh, I should get a vaccine. I think I have a cold.
I see what you did there.
That wasn't even planned!
Oh, it wasn't? You didn't
No,
plan that?
I actually had a sneeze there. I turned it into something good, so I don't have to edit.
Well, aren't you a crafty little duck you are?
Now I have to edit.
Now you have to edit, and I did that, so you have to edit. But do you want to play another quick guessing game?
Sure.
Let's play Name That Disease.
Ooh!
That's where you edit in a sound effect, by the way.
Ba-da-ba-ba.
Alright, let's begin. What's this one?
Measles, because it says measles. Why?
Correct. What makes you think this is measles?
Well, aside from the fact that it says measles right in front of the screen, I'm going to go with, I just know that measles looks like chicken pox. So I'm guessing.
Well, you are correct, and measles is also preventable by a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
What's this one?
Ooh. What the heck? Lou Gehrig's disease.
No, that is mumps, which I also recognize is right on the screen.
Oh, it is? I didn't see that one.
I didn't
Dude,
plan
that's
this up too
also it
effectively.
says mumps Wikipedia if I read, if I could read.
Yeah,
I did not know that's what mumps
but this
look
is
like.
mumps.
Is
and
mumps like something to do with your tonsils or something? Like, what the heck?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I know it causes swelling in your lymph nodes in your face.
You know why we don't know this? Because there's vaccines.
Right, because mumps is also preventable by a vaccine. What about this one?
Is that chickenpox?
Again, the title is right there. I totally.
You really
bombed
should
this.
you should have saved the pictures and then just posted the picture to me.
Yeah. Oh well. I guess you can't turn back time. But yes,
I just won't read.
But yes, this is chickenpox, also preventable by a vaccine. What about this one?
That's probably polio.
Yes, this is polio. Disfigures your limbs. Also completely preventable by a vaccine. And the last one.
Oh my God, what is that? Is that like holy scarlet fever or something?
Nope, that would be
Oh,
smallpox.
that's smallpox.
One of the worst diseases to ever plague mankind.
I actually have no idea what scarlet fever looks like. if you look like anything.
Well, I deliberately had to choose diseases here that showcased an external reaction on the body. But anyhow, smallpox is also preventable by a vaccine. So can you guess, based on that guessing game, what we are going to be talking about today?
Diseases.
Wrong. We are going to be talking about vaccines, the greatest human innovation ever created. And you may be wondering, why are we talking about vaccines on a technology-focused podcast? Well, because vaccines truly are a technology. And like I just said, what do you mean a bit of a stretch?
I mean, we compared to like where the artificial podcasts like AI and stuff, like it's not really tech-based vaccines, but it takes tech to make vaccines.
Correct. It is a technology, and in fact, it falls under the umbrella of biotechnology, which, since we are expanding our scope to encompass emerging tech, this fits perfectly.
So that means we could have like a podcast about cars because AI machines make cars.
We could specifically talk about autonomous vehicles, absolutely.
Okay. I don't want to. I was just saying.
Okay, well, bringing it back, we are going to be focusing this week's episode on vaccines. So, welcome again, dear audience, listener,
Yeah.
to another week and another episode of the Artificial Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in.
My name is Nick Myers, and I am so excited to be joined once again by my best buddy, partner in crime, CTO, and editor of the Artificial Podcast, Mr. Brett Brooks.
Hello, everybody. Hi. What's new with your week, Nick? Want to update people on what's going on with your life?
Nope, we're done. So,
Okay.
every
Sounds good.
time I used to do that, you used to complain, so we don't do that anymore.
I don't know. Sorry.
Okay. Well, with that out of the way, like I said, we are going to be talking about vaccines this week. And I want to talk about vaccines not just because they are a technology and can technically fall under the umbrella of emerging technology being under biotech, but I think it's incredibly timely given the massive rollout of the new COVID-19 vaccine, which is the first widely used and highly effective coronavirus vaccine, which is really saying something. It really is if you look at the history of disease and vaccines. Also, probably even more important, there are unbearable amounts of misinformation in general with vaccines, but even more so with the COVID-19 vaccine. So we're going to clear up some of that misinformation. And as I just mentioned, Brett, all emerging tech, which is the focus of our show moving forward, and really has been since day one, even though I know we niched out in AI and voice, all emerging tech is our focus moving forward. And I view vaccines falling under the umbrella of biotech, which is going to fundamentally change our society as we know it. So you can throw vaccines into biotech with genome sequencing, stem cell therapy, cancer vaccines, gene therapy, you name it. It's all under biotech, and it's all going to reshape society and adjust our lifespans accordingly.
Yep, I agree with you.
Thanks, Brett.
I mean, would you like me to be devil's advocate and say, no, it's not? I don't believe in vaccines. They're just putting chips in our systems.
No, we're not going there yet.
Oh, yet.
No, we're not going there yet. That's not the point of why we're doing this. But we will be clearing up some of the misinformation.
Okay.
So I think it only appropriate to kick this off with, what is a vaccine? So, Brett, before we dive into any of this, since you are the layperson of the show, what do you think a vaccine is? What is a vaccine? Tell me in your own words.
Talking about DNA or mRNA?
It's a broad question. You tell me what you think a vaccine is.
A vaccine is something to train your immune system to fight before you get the actual virus.
Yes. That is a very good high-level overview of what a vaccine is. You
Yes.
should be proud of that knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
But first and foremost, I think a vaccine is the most miraculous piece of biotechnology that we have ever created. As I was going through and researching how vaccines work, the different types of vaccine ingredients, the different types of vaccines, and how we have been able to do what we can do with them, it is truly a miracle. And people do not appreciate the fact that we have this technology nearly as much as they should.
When we first, when was the first vaccine? Like, who invented it? Do we have that information on hand or no?
I will go through a brief history, but, I mean, you can say that the ancient Chinese were using ancient vaccine technology to prevent smallpox, but the father of the modern-day vaccine, what's his name? Edward Jenner,
okay.
who developed a smallpox vaccine from cowpox back in 1796.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I read about that at one point in my life. I forgot.
So, like I said, though, people do not appreciate this technology enough. Let's look. Prior to vaccines, the average life expectancy globally was around 35 years old.
Yes. That's pretty young.
Right. And now, of
You
course...
wonder why the peak of your lifespan is 16. Well, it's
Right.
like halfway.
And now, the average lifespan is what, 76? I mean, it varies by country, but...
Yeah, you ever wonder why people say like, "Oh, my joints ache and I get 2-day hangovers"? It's because your body's literally dying after like the age of 25. Like
Correct.
you're supposed to be dead
We have
if you're over
doubled
40.
our lifespan over the last 200 years, specifically because of vaccines. And prior to vaccines, when people would get severe illness, they used very gruesome methods to try and treat people because, of course, they didn't have the knowledge of vaccines, nor did they have a whole lot of scientific knowledge when it came to disease to begin with. So common methods used to cure illness included bloodletting, where they would literally cut you open and let you bleed to remove the bad blood that they thought was infecting you.
They would also do it with leeches, wouldn't they?
Yes, I actually have that in my notes here. They would also use leeches who would suck out the bad blood. So can you imagine? You're pretty much on your deathbed already from a disease, and the doctor comes in and says, well, let's just cut you open and let you bleed out onto the floor.
You ever wonder like how many people had cancer back in the day? They just didn't know it was cancer. Like all the history books and stuff probably say like died of natural causes, but the natural causes might have been cancer.
Right, and then they just bloodlet you onto the floor.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, though. You look at what vaccines have done for society and have done for the human species. We really need to appreciate this technology far more than we do.
The problem I see with in the future is overpopulation, though, because we have extended our lifespans. We now have an overpopulation on Earth. Well, not yet, but you can tell it's coming. Like, there's a lot of humans on this planet. It's detrimental to the environment.
Our population is expected to decrease greatly by 2100.
Well, because less people are having kids, and I think that's nature's way of saying, hey, there's too many of you here. It's time to de-escalate the population.
Also, with increased education and intelligence, typically you see birth rates decline.
Yes.
Although that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Anyhow,
No.
I say we start with the basics. So for everybody listening, and even for you, Brett, let's dive into the basics of vaccines. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So much like what you said, Brett, vaccines essentially contain the same germs that cause disease. Example being the annual influenza vaccine contains actual influenza virus, depending on the type of vaccine that you get. And in a vaccine, the virus or bacteria itself has either been weakened or deactivated to the point where the pathogen can no longer make you sick. Two very common types of vaccines here.
Yes.
And some vaccines contain only a part of the disease germ, which we'll get into in a bit here, and that is somewhat how the new COVID-19 vaccine actually works, and this is relatively new vaccine technology.
Because the new vaccine doesn't have a virus in it, right?
Well, there's a certain
puts the spike protein on your cells.
There's a certain type of vaccine that's been around for quite some time. The mRNA that COVID-19 vaccine is using has been around for a couple of decades, but subunit vaccines have actually been around for quite longer, and we'll get into that.
Yep.
But of course, as a result, the presence of these weakened or deactivated pathogens, germs, that are injected through the vaccine into the body stimulate your immune system to produce antibodies, which of course these antibodies are what attach to foreign germs, preventing them from making you sick. And I think the most important piece of this is, unlike most medicines that are used to either treat or cure disease, vaccines prevent disease, which,
yes.
I mean, that makes them incredibly powerful just because of that alone.
Yes.
It's one thing to treat somebody when they're already sick, but it's another thing to prevent them from getting sick entirely.
Yes.
Again, another reason that we all need to appreciate this technology just a teensy bit more.
Nope, it's devil juice.
Again, all of this comes with education. You can't help yourself, can you?
No, man, I read too much stuff online. There's some insane people out there.
I'm aware, but that's why we do what we're doing with the Artificial Podcast, to crush that misinformation before it even begins.
Yeah, we should have done that like 50 years ago.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah.
So now that we know what a vaccine is, what are some of the active ingredients commonly used in vaccines? Well, there's 4 primary ones, actually. The first is something called an adjuvant, which help boost your body's immune response. Adjuvants are actually found in antacids, buffered aspirin, and antiperspirants, so common things we use in our day-to-day life, so nothing
Oh.
out of the ordinary there.
Wait, so my Tums boost my immune system?
I don't know, but
You heard it here first, folks. Pop some Tums. You don't even need the vaccine anymore.
Adjuvants are used in antacids, buffered aspirin, and antiperspirants, and
All
a
right.
handful of other common products that we use.
Okay.
So nothing uncommon there. The second ingredient is stabilizers, which help keep the vaccine effective after it is manufactured. And these stabilizers are also found in food products such as Jell-O and actually reside within the human body naturally. So a very common ingredient, these stabilizers that are used to keep the vaccine effective.
Cool.
The third ingredient is formaldehyde, something we all have heard before.
Yep.
And formaldehyde is used to prevent contamination by bacteria during the manufacturing process. And of course, formaldehyde resides within the human body naturally. And actually, there's more formaldehyde naturally within the human body than within vaccines, for the record. And formaldehyde is also found in the environment, preservatives, and common household products. So again, nothing out of the ordinary there. And the fourth ingredient that is commonly used in vaccines is thimerosal. And it is used during the manufacturing process, but is no longer an ingredient in any vaccine. So strike what I said there. It used to be common in vaccines, but is no longer a common ingredient in any vaccine except multi-dose vials of the flu vaccine. So thimerosal is really only used with the flu vaccine. And this is the ingredient that was reported by that wonderful report back in the 90s that tried to claim the flu vaccine led to autism.
Oh, that one report that was proven wrong, and everybody's taking it to the streets now.
Yes, and the doctor lost his medical license and all this stuff, which I will throw on top of what I just said here. No reputable scientific studies have found an association between thimerosal in vaccines and autism, for the record.
Uh-huh.
So those are the 4 common ingredients within vaccines.
Yep.
And on top of these ingredients, vaccines are inherently safe. They're actually one of the safest forms of biotechnology that we have today. Before a vaccine is ever approved to be widely used on people in clinical trials, it has to go through a very rigorous process. Let's use the United States as an example, through the Food and Drug Administration. And of course, depending on the country, other international regulatory agencies that oversee the extensive lab testing of these vaccines. And it may take several years just from the lab testing to make sure it's safe and effective. And then even after the lab testing has completed, it may take several more years before clinical studies are complete and the vaccine is licensed.
Yes. Now, what makes this one different, Nick?
Well, we'll talk about that when we get to the COVID part of our episode here. But
I keep bringing up these tangents that we can go off and talk on, but it's going to be in the future of what you wrote down.
Well, because I just don't want to dive into it now when we're naturally going to get there later.
Okay.
I mean, I guess what I can speak to from what I was able to research, the main difference between the process that takes several years to bring a vaccine to market versus now is money and emergency.
Okay.
Those are the 2 things I was able to deduce.
And pretty much the whole world
the
trying
difference.
to get
well,
published,
because
not
the world
published,
is in panic mode, and because
Yes.
normally when you bring a vaccine to market, it is incredibly expensive. That's also why it takes a very long time. So with all this money and all of this emergency, the FDA was able to give it their emergency use authorization going off of the data that they thoroughly reviewed from Pfizer, Moderna, and soon to be Johnson & Johnson. But it still goes through that same review process. It's just expedited greatly.
Yes.
Because of money and emergency.
Yes. Correct.
So that is what I have to say to that. So I think the most fascinating part of all this are the different types of vaccines that we currently have available to use. There are 4 primary ones, and the last one goes into this mRNA type vaccine that COVID-19, the the COVID-19 vaccine is an mRNA vaccine.
Yes.
So the first common type of vaccine is known as live attenuated. So how this works, which is quite fascinating, is a pathogen is passed through a series of cell cultures or animal embryos, which typically are chick embryos, which is why if you've gone to get the flu shot, they ask you if you're allergic to eggs, because one of the common ways that they grow the flu virus and create a vaccine from it is through this live attenuated process, which is typically done using chick embryos, chick eggs. But as the pathogen passes through multiple embryos, it becomes better at replicating in chick cells, but loses its ability to replicate well or actually at all in human cells. So when used as a vaccine, the pathogen cannot replicate in human cells through this process going through all these embryos, but can still provoke an immune response. So the moment it is injected via the vaccine into the human body, it cannot replicate in human cells because of this process. But it can still provoke an immune response. And it is technically still live virus, so they are injecting you with live virus. It's just been attenuated so it cannot replicate in human cells. And some common vaccines that use this technology includes the measles, mumps, and rubella MMR vaccine, the varicella chickenpox vaccine, and the nasal spray influenza vaccine along with rotavirus. All of those vaccines use the live attenuated vaccine type.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty neat. Again, the fact that we discovered that and used that is just crazy. The second is inactivated or killed. So this is when the pathogen is actually inactivated or killed using heat or chemicals such as formaldehyde or another chemical called formalin. So this actually destroys the pathogen's ability to replicate, but keeps it intact so that the immune system can still recognize it. And because these vaccines are inactivated, they tend to provide a shorter length of protection and are more likely to require boosters for long-term immunity. And diseases like polio and the hepatitis A vaccines use this type of inactivated or killed method. So, again, very interesting. I did not know the difference between the first two until doing this research, and I'm glad that I did that because it's 110% fascinating. The third type is toxoid. So some bacterial diseases are actually not directly caused by the bacteria itself. Think of tetanus, right? Tetanus is a bacteria, but it's not actually the bacteria that causes lockjaw. It's actually the toxin produced by the bacteria. So these vaccines are actually created by inactivating that specific toxin, and that's why they're called toxoids. So the diphtheria vaccine and the tetanus vaccine use this toxoid vaccine type to keep you from getting sick.
Okay.
Again, incredibly interesting. And the last type here, and this goes into the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine, is subunit or conjugate vaccine. So both subunit and conjugate vaccines contain only like pieces of the pathogens they protect against, so not the whole pathogen or virus or bacteria itself. And how they do this is really fascinating. They actually isolate a specific protein from the pathogen, and they present it as an antigen on its own. An example of this could be the pertussis whooping cough vaccine and the influenza vaccine actually in shot form. They only use a tiny piece of the flu virus in the shot form to give you that immunity. And this is just fascinating because you don't actually get injected with the pathogen itself. It's that little piece or, something that can generate a protein like the mRNA vaccine, so it can actually go inside of your cell, create the protein, and your body can fight against it without ever having to be exposed to the pathogen itself, unlike toxoid, unlike inactivated or killed or live attenuated.
Now think about if we can do that with every known virus now.
Yes. And this is where the genetic engineering part comes in, because another type of subunit vaccine can be created using genetic engineering. So this is more or less what they did with the COVID-19 vaccine. So what they do here is a gene coding for a vaccine protein is inserted into another virus. So think of, so for example, they use another virus as a vehicle, right? They deactivate it, they put the protein of the target virus into this virus, and then they put that virus into the vaccine, into the human body, which carries it to the host cell. And yes, it's fascinating. This is all absolutely fascinating.
Then you're immune system's like, oh, I've seen that before. Time to kill it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, as a result from the subunit conjugate vaccine types that only use a piece but don't actually infect you with the whole virus, the result is something called a recombinant vaccine. So the immune system will recognize the expressed protein and provide future protection against the target virus. So people may think what we have done with the COVID-19 vaccine is new. No, we actually have multiple vaccines that are already widely available that use this technology, such as hepatitis B, the influenza injection, pertussis or whooping cough, pneumococcal or pneumonia, and the meningitis vaccine along with HPV. So this subunit conjugate vaccine type is absolutely fascinating because they've been using it for a while, and now because of COVID-19, it's becoming incredibly mainstream and will probably be the future of how we develop all vaccines.
Well, it should be. It seems like it's like way easier to create a vaccine for a disease. I'm trying to think of how to word this. Seems like the old way was very niche, like you're creating a vaccine for a specific disease. This one seems like it'd be like wider, more general sense of.
You can actually use one, for example, with a subunit or conjugate vaccine, or what they can do with mRNA, which we'll get into here in a bit. They can actually create one vaccine that covers multiple different diseases.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And when you look at like the live attenuated vaccine or the inactivated killer toxoid, they're still very effective, but they just take a lot longer to produce. Whereas the subunit conjugate vaccines can be produced incredibly quickly and at scale.
Okay.
So, really, really cool stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting. So now that we've laid the groundwork, of course, for what a vaccine actually is, which of course I think is the most important part, what is the history of vaccines? What have they looked like throughout our history? We're not going to go into a too detailed of history here, but I just want to put into perspective that vaccine tech has really been around for quite a while, and evidence exists that, as I mentioned a bit earlier, that the Chinese employed smallpox inoculation as early as 1000 CE. And it was also practiced in Turkey and Africa before it spread to Europe and the Americas. So there is evidence that we were actually using vaccine technology as early as 1000 CE, which is pretty interesting. But of course, it didn't really hit, mainstream as we know it today until Edward Jenner begun the use of the smallpox vaccine that he derived from cowpox in 1796. And he's kind of known as the father of the vaccine. But his technology would ultimately lead to the eradication of smallpox over 200 years later, which I think is really cool. And then we have Louis Pasteur, who I actually, back in junior high, we had to do like a historical figures project where you researched a historical figure, wrote a report on it, and dressed up as them, and were on a panel.
Yeah.
I was Louis Pasteur.
Oh, were ya? So you're
Yeah.
you're famous. So you developed the rabies vaccine.
So Louis Pasteur, yes, also a very influential figure in vaccine development and history. He developed the rabies vaccine in 1885, and it was really because of his development with the rabies vaccine that led to this dawn of bacteriology with developments in antitoxins and vaccines against diphtheria, tetanus, anthrax, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis,
The plague,
and more. And most of these were developed through the 1930s.
but not the Black Plague.
I mean, plague comes in a couple of different forms, actually. It's just a blanket term. I used to be really obsessed with disease, and I used to research diseases a lot.
I remember
as a
you
kid.
telling me that,
Yeah.
which
Like
is a good thing.
Like, I tend to think in an alternate reality I'm probably a virologist or an epidemiologist somewhere.
What? Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Because I find all this incredibly fascinating. So, of course, after, through the 1930s, we get to the middle of the 20th century, which was an active time for vaccine research because methods of growing virus in the laboratory evolved and were developed incredibly rapidly. So then we got vaccines for polio, measles, mumps, and rubella, which, of course, are very common childhood vaccines that every child should get. And in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, of course, this led to innovations in recombinant DNA technology, those subunit conjugate vaccines, and new delivery techniques.
But
So,
Nick, if nobody has measles, why should I worry about my kid getting the vaccine for the measles? Because then my
Well-
kid won't get it. Duh.
well, because unlike smallpox, measles has not been completely eradicated. So there's still the possibility of natural infection.
Oh my God, that sounds like common sense to me. Okay.
Does it?
That makes sense.
Does it sound like common sense?
That makes a lot of sense, and I should probably get my kid vaccinated for the measles then.
I mean,
That took like a minute of convincing because it's so much common sense was in that
there is
sentence
an
you
argument. Let me go back.
said. Okay.
However, there are some arguments within certain religions that you cannot use vaccines, which I get and has to be respected. But on the whole, children should be vaccinated for some of these common diseases because most of them are still naturally occurring. The only one that I was able to research that has been completely eradicated is smallpox. I mean, there still is even plague out there. It's incredibly small number of cases per year, but there is still plague.
Yeah, true.
So that's why vaccination is important, which actually is a good segue into the smallpox eradication. And this is really fascinating. Like, you knew they eradicated smallpox, right?
Yeah, it only exists in Russia.
Well, there are only 2 places on Earth where it still currently exists, at the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, and
Russia.
somewhere in Russia.
Yeah, and they're gonna put in their nuke that they're gonna bomb us with one day.
Thanks, Brett. Such a chipper ray of sunshine and positivity you are. Anyhow, in 1959, the World Health Organization initiated a plan to rid the world of smallpox. Of course, I did not live through this. Some of you who may be listening did live through this, but it was decided in 1959 the WHO wanted to rid the world of smallpox, which is a very lofty goal.
Yeah.
And in 1967, almost 10 years later, the intensified eradication program began with endemic countries, so countries that still had many naturally occurring cases of smallpox. They began with these endemic countries because they finally were able to produce more high-quality and freeze-dried vaccine, because even today, it is still very hard to eradicate diseases in developing countries and third-world countries because you don't have the distribution technology that first-world countries have to deliver it to people effectively. And that will always be the problem until it's fixed.
Yeah.
Which we'll see. That's why, like, with Bill Gates trying to eradicate polio in Africa was such a lofty order, because it just takes so much money to do something like that in developing and third world countries, because they just don't have the infrastructure to support mass vaccination programs.
Yeah.
But by the time the eradication program had begun in 1967, smallpox had already been eliminated in North America and Europe, actually, which only meant they had to eradicate it in South America, Asia, and Africa. And by the end of the 1970s, smallpox was eradicated from the face of the earth. And the last known case of smallpox, or naturally occurring case of smallpox, happened in a 3-year-old girl from Bangladesh in 1975. She was the last known person on Earth to ever acquire smallpox naturally.
You ever, like, research this stuff and, like, think about all the dangerous diseases we had back in the day and just look at, like, an 80-year-old today, or an 80, like my grandma, 87-year-old, and be like, how the hell did you survive up to this point? How did anybody survive through all that stuff back in the day? Like, you're telling me, Grandma, that you dodged polio, you dodged smallpox, you dodged all the other things that didn't have a vaccine yet, and you're sitting here, you didn't get hit by a car, you didn't get, die in a plane crash, you didn't, like, nothing happened to you, and you're just sitting here like a little old lady in a nursing home at 87 years old.
Yep.
It just baffles me how people can...
I know you want to say it. I know you do. I can see your lips.
I don't know what you want me to say. Or think I'm going to say.
You're saying that people who are in the elderly category should feel grateful that they even had the opportunity to live as long as they have.
Oh, well, that's a good point. I wasn't thinking that, though.
Oh. Well, what were you
But good
thinking?
point, Nick. Oh, it just amazes me, like, because you see how many people die every year that are, like, our age, kids, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Well, again.
You're right. You should just feel grateful that you live to be 80 at least.
Well, again, to what we talked about. Prior to vaccines, the average lifespan was 35 years old.
Yeah.
Now it's in your mid to late 70s, and probably will extend far beyond that as medical technology and vaccine technology gets better.
Correct. Like, did you know, like, our founding fathers were all, like, younger than us when they made the Declaration of Independence? Yeah.
Like pharaohs in ancient Egypt, like, you only lived to be like 20 years old. There were pharaohs that became pharaohs at 16.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, perspective is all I have to say.
Yeah, perspective.
Perspective. We've been spoiled, and we're taking it all for granted, which is why what happened with COVID-19, I think, was a really good reality check. Because we truly took this technology alone for granted, and still are. Which is why it angers me that there are so many people who truly don't want to take the 45 to 60 minutes it took me to dive into this and understand it and recognize this is the most miraculous scientific invention and technology that we have ever created in human history.
What about sliced bread?
I'm moving on.
Dude, that's like my job. I always have to like ruin the tangents and get us back on track.
Well,
Actually, I praise them too, though.
Well, and with that being said, the eradication of smallpox has actually been recognized as the biggest achievement in international public health, as it should be, because we eradicated a disease. Gone.
Yeah, right? That's insane.
So,
Something that once existed does not exist anymore.
So then we get into COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay.
The
mRNA
cherry on top of the sundae we've been building.
Mm-hmm.
So the COVID-19 vaccine, how does it work? Well, the COVID-19 vaccine can technically be considered a type of subunit or conjugate vaccine that we talked about a bit earlier, except that the COVID-19 vaccine is known as an mRNA vaccine, and they are a new type of vaccine that are used to protect against infectious disease. What?
I'm just thinking of stupid stuff in my head. Like, how do you create the COVID-19 vaccine? Well, first you go to your local 5G tower, and then you... Dude, I read so much dumb, like, QAnon stuff, man.
Leave that out of our podcast, please.
No. Not that I believe in it or anything like that. I just like to read the crazy stuff that people are coming up with these days. So I'm equipped for it, you know?
Well, let's dive back in to the COVID-19 vaccine to dispel this misinformation, shall we?
Sounds good to me.
So, as I was saying, COVID-19 vaccine is an mRNA-based vaccine, so it is a relatively new type of vaccine used to prevent infectious disease, but actually has been around for a couple of decades. So what they do with this is, instead of putting a weakened or an activated virus into our bodies, one of the different types of vaccines, of course, that we talked about a bit earlier, mRNA vaccines teach our cells how to make a protein that triggers an immune response inside of our bodies. And again, the most fascinating part about all this is we can do this without ever having to expose anybody to the virus.
Correct.
That alone is a scientific miracle.
Yes.
And this strand of mRNA from the SARS-CoV-2 virus teaches our cells how to make what is called the spike protein.
Spike protein.
That is found on the surface of the pathogen.
Mm-hmm.
And once the mRNA instructions are inside of our cells, our immune cells... Wait.
It's like you're giving our cells a little blueprint on how to make the spike protein, and our immune system goes, hey, that looks bad. That's foreign.
Once these mRNA instructions are inside of the host cell, or host cell, I guess we'll call it here.
You can't really call it a host cell.
So once the instructions are inside the cells then use them to make the protein, the spike protein, piece by piece. And after the protein piece is made, the cell then breaks down the instructions and gets rid of them, so that mRNA does not stick around forever. It is used by the ribosome. God, all my biology from college and high school is coming back here.
The powerhouse of the cell.
The mRNA piece is used by the ribosome within the cell to create this protein, which then resolves to the spike protein on the surface of the cell. So next, the cell displays this protein piece on its surface, and our immune systems recognize that the protein doesn't belong there and build an immune response. And
how does it know that?
Antibodies, such as the body does against natural COVID-19
How does it know that?
How does it know that?
How does it know that that's not wanted?
Because our bodies are an incredible piece of biological machinery. After the cell creates the protein using the mRNA piece from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the cell displays the protein on its surface, and our immune systems recognize that the protein doesn't belong there and builds an immune response. So not once, like I said, does an actual SARS-CoV-2 virus enter the body to produce an immune response, which is incredible. And the mRNA strand never enters the nucleus of the cell, which is where our DNA is kept, because it is biologically impossible. For the record, to anybody out there who may think that the COVID-19 vaccine, because of its mRNA type, is something related to gene therapy, which I have seen floating around, which is absolutely false.
Yeah, I don't want to change my genes.
It is biologically impossible for that mRNA to enter the nucleus of the cell where our DNA is kept. So, researchers have been studying and working with mRNA vaccines for decades, so it's been around for quite some time. And it's, of course, only recently interest has grown significantly because they can be developed easily in a lab using readily available materials. And, of course, this process, because it can be done in a lab, can be standardized and scaled up, making vaccine development faster than traditional methods like the live attenuated, the toxoid, and the inactivated methods. They can be developed so much faster than those methods of making vaccines in the past.
Yeah.
And future mRNA vaccines may allow for one vaccine to provide protection against multiple diseases, which would be incredible. So then you can only use 1 or 2 shots to cover a majority of diseases versus having multiple shots for the same disease or a handful of different diseases.
Yeah.
Like, they're thinking with this mRNA technology, they very well could develop a true vaccine for the common cold because they can cover all the different coronavirus variants.
Yep, the variants and all that. Now, why can't they... I'm guessing this is because this is brand new. They're probably having trouble with the variants of COVID-19 because that's actually a good point because it can cover the variant we have here in the USA and the variant that's in UK, just not the variant in South Africa, right?
Well, it's
or
still...
trouble, right? Trouble.
Well, it's still, from what I was reading, it still can provide some immunity. It's not as much as the other two variants of the virus, but it does reduce the efficacy a bit.
Yeah, like you probably won't die.
Right. You won't get severe disease.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing. Viruses are evolving and changing all the time, depending on the type of virus. Coronaviruses tend to evolve quite frequently. So this is one of those diseases that we may have to get a vaccine for every year or every 2 years.
Possibly.
The influenza virus mutates rapidly, which is why we have a new flu vaccine every year.
Trying to think of...
But and that's after going through this and really getting into the science of it. This is why I still have such a hard time understanding where the conspiracy theories come from. This information,
just people reading stuff online.
That's what I'm saying.
This
Information came from the Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, the College of Pennsylvania History of Vaccines.
Yeah, they're all in on it. Nick, you know that's not going to work with people that are crazy like that, right?
But it took
It's not going to work. They can just say you're part of the system.
It took me 45 to 60 minutes to digest all this information.
Yeah,
and I'm not a genius by any fathom of imagination.
All that information's wrong, and they're part of the system. They're controlling you, you sheep. Bah, bah. That's what they'd say.
But that's wrong.
There's no convincing people that got to a place that didn't take facts to get there. There's no convincing them. It's like talking to a damn wall.
But that's the same.
You're the problem, Nick.
But that's the same with the anti-vaxxer movement. Like, that all was birthed out of a false medical report. Or medical journal.
Yeah, that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that was a false medical report so they can get all your kids to have autism. Which, by the way, I've always said this. If you're concerned about your kids having autism from a vaccine, that's just saying that you'd rather have your kid die than live with autism. Some nice parent you are.
Well, realistically, the influenza virus has a pretty low mortality, but still.
Well, I'm not even talking about that. I was just talking about in general. If people are concerned about not giving their kids vaccines because they think they're having autism, you're saying you'd rather have your kid dead than live with autism.
Well, we show what mumps look like. Would you rather have mumps?
No. That looks horrible.
I mean, I think this is incredible technology, and I'm really happy I did this research using credible sources. And again,
Yeah, incredible, quote unquote.
I'm
just kidding.
I'm not an expert in this whatsoever. If you want true expertise, go and find a virologist, an epidemiologist, more qualified people than I could ever be. I'm just regurgitating information that I got from credible sources.
Yeah, and for all the listeners, I don't believe any of that. I'm just giving Nick a hard time being devil's advocate. And I'm just saying what people are saying online. Like, they're not going to believe Nick. They just think Nick's puppet of the system, basically. They're not going to believe any information you give them.
Well, our entire theme of our podcast is to help educate people about emerging technology.
Correct.
If this new type of mRNA vaccine is not an emerging technology, I don't know what is.
We're talking about the people that are on the border right now, from going to crazy town to staying in reality town. We're going to help them come back to reality town. We're not going to help the people that are in the rabbit's rabbit hole, okay? That have left the chicken coop. We're not going to be able to help those people. They're long gone. We're going to help the people that are, like, on the fence.
I mean,
make sense?
My friend Ming and I have always joked about buying some magnets and some string and calling it an anti-COVID or anti-5G device and selling it.
That probably could work.
If you hang it outside your window, the 5G won't get you.
Put this below your pillow. Put this below your pillow every night.
Or the COVID-19 won't get you.
Good luck from 5G.
It's just disappointing, Brett.
I don't care anymore. This whole year with COVID coming out has made me look way down upon the human race. Like, I thought we had at least I thought we had sane people in this country. I thought human beings were at least reasonable, but there's a large chunk of the population.
Brett, it's not just the United States.
Even Earth. I was just about to say that. In the world, there's a shit ton of crazy people that believe dumbass shit.
To the point that I made earlier, it's because we took a lot of this for granted. We took for granted that we had an incredible technology that has doubled our lifespan and has saved countless lives from horrible disease, and we got complacent. And then when the universe and Mother Nature decided to give us a little bit of a reminder nudge about what could happen, people couldn't comprehend that. And that's what led to the current problem.
Yeah.
That's why things like this are incredibly important, to actually crack a book, go to a credible website from a credible source, and read the information. I'm going through the CDC's website. I can't imagine how long it took them to, one, write all this information, but two, write it and structure it in a way to make it understandable for a layperson to read.
I understand that, and I think the CDC is incredibly credible, but they're just going to say they're the puppeteers. Like, the CDC's the cabal or whatever.
Well,
that's all they believe in.
I guess I'll be standing back with my vaccines in hand. That is our episode around vaccines. Thank you, as always, for joining us this week. We appreciate it so much. And if you or someone you know is interested in being a guest on the show, send us a DM on Twitter or an email to theartificialpodcast@redfox-ai.com. We actually do have a guest interview coming up, if you can believe it. And I am still working on trying to recruit guests and find some incredible people to bring on the show. But truthfully, we've gotten a lot of good feedback that you all like listening to Brett and I ramble.
Really? Have we gotten more?
Yeah, I got a lot of feedback from people saying they really enjoyed the episodes that you and I do together.
Well, cool. Oh, nice.
So that's why we kind of
been
doing this a bit more. But make sure to smash subscribe.
Hit that
YouTube,
bell notification.
As well as subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and also leave us a review. They go a long way in helping us to know what you all are thinking and make the show better. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and join our Artificial Podcasters Facebook group. You can find a link to that and all of our social media platforms in the episode notes. As always, thank you, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.
Artificial
Intelligent voice recognition.
machine learning.
Robotic.
You've been listening to the Artificial Podcast with your host, Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
To stay up to date with all our latest episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts. To learn more about how your organization can benefit by unlocking the power of AI and voice, visit www.redfox-ai.com. Until next time.